The laughter is what I'll remember longest, not the judge's impatient scowl or the prosecutor's rehearsed indignation. Not even Officer Brennan's practice testimony about finding drug paraphernalia in my immaculate Toyota Camry, a car I vacuum weekly out of habit since my days driving for Uber. No, what will haunt me is the casual, comfortable laughter that rippled through the courtroom when Officer Mendoza mimicked my attitude during the traffic stop 3 weeks ago, dropping his voice an octave, adding a stereotypical head roll, turning my calm request to understand why I was being pulled over into a caricature of black female aggression that made even the bailiff smirk. It was the sound of a system entertaining itself at my expense. The soundtrack of public humiliation. Ms. Williams, Judge Harrison sighs now, peering at me over reading glasses that cost more than the monthly rent on my apartment. These officers have presented body camera footage, physical evidence, and consistent testimony regarding your behavior during this incident. Do you have anything substantive to add before I render judgment? What they expect is surrender. A tearful apology, perhaps, or defiant outrage they can use to justify whatever punishment they've already decided upon. Either would confirm the narrative they've constructed. Another angry black woman who doesn't respect authority, who brings trouble on herself, who deserves whatever happens to her. What they don't expect is careful observation. Yes, Your Honor, I reply, my voice clear and measured. I'd like to address several inconsistencies in the officer's testimony that I believe merit further examination. Officer Brennan straightens in his seat at the prosecution table. Officer Mendoza's smirk falters slightly. The prosecutor, a man named Davidson who has barely acknowledged my existence throughout these proceedings, suddenly looks up from his notes. Judge Harrison sighs again, making no effort to hide his impatience. Proceed, but be brief. This court has a full docket today. I open the leather-bound notebook I've carried throughout this ordeal. A gift from my grandmother, who cleaned courtrooms like this one for 30 years and taught me that justice rarely arrives without invitation. First, Officer Brennan testified that he initiated the traffic stop at 9:45 p.m. because my taillight was out. However, the body camera footage clearly shows a timestamp of 10:17 p.m. and my taillight is functioning correctly in the video. I pause, letting this register. The prosecutor's pen has stopped moving across his legal pad. Second, Officer Mendoza stated that the drug paraphernalia was discovered in plain view on my passenger seat during a routine search. Yet the evidence log shows it was found in the trunk, which would have required probable cause to search, cause that was never established nor explained in any of their reports. Now Officer Brennan is whispering urgently to the prosecutor, who holds up a hand to silence him without taking his eyes off me. Third, and perhaps most concerning, I continue, my heart pounding but my voice steady. The body camera footage shows a 17-minute gap between my initial detainment and when backup arrived. A gap that coincides precisely with when this alleged contraband was discovered. According to department policy, body cameras should run continuously during all civilian interactions. Judge Harrison's bored expression has transformed into something more alert. Ms. Williams, are you alleging evidence tampering by these officers? I'm noting factual inconsistencies in sworn testimony. Your Honor, I reply carefully, and I'm requesting that the court examine why these particular officers seem so intent on arresting me 3 weeks after I filed a complaint about suspicious activity I witnessed behind the Westlake storage facility. Activity involving Officer Brennan's personal vehicle and several young women who appeared to be in distress. The courtroom falls silent. Even the ambient sounds, shuffling papers, creaking chairs, whispered commentary, cease entirely, as if the air itself has been sucked from the room. That's a serious accusation, Judge Harrison says finally, studying me with new intensity. It's not an accusation, Your Honor. It's a documented report filed with the department's Civilian Oversight Division on April 17th. I remove a copy from my notebook and hand it to the bailiff. A report that mysteriously disappeared from their records, but which I fortunately copied and had notarized. Officer Mendoza's face has drained of all humor now, his earlier performance forgotten. Officer Brennan stares straight ahead, a muscle twitching in his jaw. The prosecutor shuffles through his papers with increasing agitation. Furthermore, I continue, I've compiled a timeline correlating my complaint with similar reports from the Westlake area over the past 8 months. Reports that were similarly dismissed or lost in the system. Reports primarily filed by women of color. This was never about a traffic stop. Never about the ridiculous claim that I, a 34-year-old high school vice principal with no criminal record, was carrying drug paraphernalia. It was about silencing me before I connected dots they thought no one was tracking. They had successfully intimidated or discredited the other women who'd witnessed their late-night activities. They assumed I would be equally vulnerable. A single black woman with limited resources facing the word of 2 decorated officers. What they didn't account for was that I spent 6 years teaching investigative journalism before moving into administration. That I have a brother who works for the ACLU. That my godfather is a retired detective who taught me exactly how evidence gets manipulated and cases get buried. Your Honor, the prosecutor interjects, finally finding his voice. These unsubstantiated claims have no bearing on the charges before the court today. On the contrary, I counter, they establish clear motive for why these officers would fabricate evidence against me. And they raise disturbing questions about potential witness intimidation related to a much more serious ongoing criminal enterprise. Judge Harrison removes his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. A gesture I recognize from my years working with school administrators confronting problems they hoped would simply go away. Ms. Williams, do you have anything beyond correlation to support these implications? This is the moment. The precipice between being dismissed as paranoid and being heard as credible. Between walking away in defeat and triggering an avalanche they can't contain. Yes, Your Honor, I say, my voice steady despite the knowledge that what comes next will permanently alter the trajectory of my life. I have location data from Officer Brennan's vehicle on 5 separate nights. Photographs of him with 3 identified trafficking victims and audio recordings of his conversations with their handler. Officer Brennan lurches to his feet. She's lying. There's no, sit down, officer. Judge Harrison orders sharply. His gaze hasn't left my face, his expression unreadable. Ms. Williams, if you possess such evidence, the proper channel would have been the department's Internal Affairs Division or the District Attorney's Office. Both avenues were pursued. Your Honor, I reply, removing 2 more documents from my notebook. These are certified mail receipts showing that packages were delivered to both offices 6 weeks ago. Packages containing preliminary evidence and requests for witness protection before providing complete documentation. I meet his gaze directly. Requests that went unanswered. The prosecutor is on his feet now. Your Honor, the state requests an immediate recess to confer with our witnesses and investigate these claims. Translation, give us time to coordinate our stories and bury this deeper. That won't be necessary, says a new voice from the back of the courtroom. Every head turns as a tall black woman in an impeccable suit strides down the center aisle, flanked by 2 men wearing the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. Special Agent Carmen Richardson, FBI Human Trafficking Task Force. She announces, her credentials extended toward Judge Harrison. We've been building a case against a trafficking ring operating out of the Westlake District for the past 14 months. Ms. Williams' evidence correlates with our ongoing investigation. Officer Brennan's face contorts with fury. Officer Mendoza seems to physically shrink in his seat. The prosecutor stares at Agent Richardson as if she's materialized from another dimension. We'll be taking custody of all evidence related to Ms. Williams' case. She continues, her tone making it clear this is not a request. And we're requesting that Officers Brennan and Mendoza be detained for questioning regarding obstruction of justice and witness intimidation. The courtroom erupts into chaos. Judge Harrison bangs his gavel repeatedly, demanding order. The prosecutor is frantically whispering with a court officer. And in the gallery behind me, 2 more officers who have been observing the proceedings suddenly rise and move toward the exit, only to find their path blocked by additional federal agents who seem to materialize from nowhere. Agent Richardson approaches me directly, lowering her voice. Your evidence packages were redirected to our office by someone inside the department. Someone who believed you wouldn't receive fair consideration through official channels. Her expression reveals nothing, but her eyes convey a clear message. You are not alone in this fight. As Officers Brennan and Mendoza are escorted from the courtroom in handcuffs, The same humiliation they've inflicted on countless others now reflected in their stunned expressions. I realize what has happened. Their laughter, their mockery, their absolute certainty in their immunity. It was all part of a system designed to make me doubt myself, to make the truth seem too costly to pursue, to ensure my voice would be dismissed before it could be truly heard. Instead, it became the catalyst for their undoing. What they intended as my public shaming has transformed into something they never anticipated. The unraveling of a criminal enterprise that reached far beyond two corrupt officers in a minor courtroom proceeding. As Judge Harrison officially dismisses all charges against me, his earlier condescension replaced by something approaching respect, I think of my grandmother who always told me, justice doesn't always arrive on its own schedule, but it keeps its appointments. Today, finally, justice showed up on time. Hey everyone, I'm absolutely blown away by your incredible comments pouring in from around the world. Where are you watching from today? If you're as inspired as I am by this powerful story of courage and accountability, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what stories I share next. How did you feel when Agent Richardson walked into that courtroom? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The federal building's interview room is nothing like the courtrooms I've spent the past 3 weeks sitting in. No polished wood, no performative authority, just stark functionality, a metal table, uncomfortable chairs, and a recording device that hasn't been turned off in 4 hours. Walk me through it again, Agent Richardson says, pushing a fresh cup of coffee toward me. Her voice carries neither doubt nor confirmation, just professional thoroughness. The first time you noticed Officer Brennan at Westlake Storage. I closed my eyes briefly, reconstructing the night that altered everything. March 30th, around 11:40 p.m., I was driving home from my brother's birthday dinner in Oakwood. Construction on Main Street forced a detour past the storage facility. The memory crystallizes how the overhead streetlight caught the reflection of a police cruiser parked behind the building, partially obscured but recognizable. How I slowed, instinctively cautious as any black person is when encountering unexpected police presence. I wouldn't have thought anything of it. I continue, except I saw Officer Brennan, though I didn't know his name then, escorting 2 young women from a white van into the back entrance of the facility. Something about their body language felt wrong. They moved like people being directed, not like people moving freely. Agent Richardson's pen moved steadily across her notebook. And you're certain it was Brennan? Not that night. That night, he was just a uniformed officer doing something that seemed off. I take a sip of coffee, organizing my thoughts. I became certain it was him 2 weeks later when he pulled me over less than a mile from that same facility. When he approached my car, I recognized him immediately. That was April 14th. Yes, a routine traffic stop, supposedly for an illegal lane change I didn't make. He seemed unsettled when I made eye contact, asked where I was coming from, where I was heading, very focused on establishing my routines. What I don't tell her, what doesn't belong in an official statement, is how the hairs on the back of my neck stood up during that encounter. How the predatory assessment in his eyes triggered the survival instincts I've developed through a lifetime of navigating spaces where my blackness makes me simultaneously hyper-visible and invisible. After that, I started paying attention. I explain. Changed my routes home to pass by the storage facility regularly. Noted dates, times, vehicles present. On April 17th, I saw him again. Civilian clothes this time, personal vehicle, but definitely him, meeting with a heavy-set white man in an expensive suit. They were arguing outside the back entrance. The man in the suit, would you recognize him again? I nod without hesitation. Gray hair, late 50s, surgical scar along the left side of his jawline. He drives a black Mercedes SUV, Alabama plates. I have the partial plate number in my notes. Agent Richardson's eyebrows lift slightly, the first crack in her professional neutrality. Impressive attention to detail. I spent 6 years teaching my students how to notice what others miss, I reply. How to recognize patterns, document observations, verify before concluding. And that training led you to start recording evidence. That and self-preservation. I meet her gaze directly. I filed that first report with civilian oversight on April 17th. 3 days later, I noticed a patrol car parked outside my apartment complex. The same car followed me to work the next morning. I knew then that my report hadn't just been ignored. It had been flagged. Understanding passes between us. The unspoken acknowledgement that systems designed for accountability often serve as early warning systems for those being held accountable. So I began documenting everything. I continue. Purchased a dash cam that automatically uploads footage to cloud storage. Asked my neighbor, a retired mechanic, to check my car regularly for tracking devices. Created a secure email account to send evidence to my brother at. The ACLU and my godfather, Vincent Taylor, Agent Richardson Supplies. 30 years with Chicago PD, last 12 in anti-trafficking. I nod, not surprised that they've already connected those dots. He taught me what to look for, how to gather evidence that would withstand scrutiny. Most importantly, he taught me to create redundancy, to ensure the evidence couldn't disappear with me. The implication hangs between us. We both know cases where whistleblowers didn't survive their revelations. That's why I sent packages to multiple agencies. Why I had everything notarized and stored in different locations. I leaned forward slightly. And why I made sure that if I was arrested or disappeared, dead man switches would activate, sending everything to journalists at 3 different publications. For the first time, Agent Richardson allows herself a small smile. You weren't taking any chances. I've spent my entire career in educational administration, Agent Richardson. I understand bureaucratic self-preservation better than most. I pause, considering how to frame the question that's been gnawing at me since the courtroom. What I don't understand is how my evidence reached your task force when it was apparently intercepted at both the local PD and the DA's office. She studies me for a moment, weighing something internally before making a decision. We have a confidential informant inside the department, she says finally. Someone who's been feeding us information on this trafficking network for months. When your packages arrived, they were flagged by people connected to the operation, but our CI managed to get copies to us before the originals disappeared. This revelation shifts my understanding of the past several weeks. I hadn't been as alone in this as I thought. How deep does this go? I ask. Beyond Brennan and Mendoza? We've identified at least 7 officers involved directly, plus civilian accomplices throughout the system. Evidence clerks, a dispatcher, 2 people in the record department. The storage facility is just one of 3 locations we've been monitoring. 7 officers. The number hits me with physical force. 7 people sworn to protect, actively participating in exploitation. The young women, I say, my throat tightening. The ones I saw, were they trafficking victims? She confirms, her professional tone softening slightly. Primarily from Central America and Eastern Europe, brought in through established channels, held at transfer points like the storage facility before being moved to more permanent locations. The clinical description doesn't mask the horror beneath. Human beings treated as commodities, their movement orchestrated by people wearing badges meant to represent justice. Is that why my case was handled the way it was? I ask. The public humiliation, the obvious frame job with the planted evidence. Agent Richardson closes her notebook. 2 purposes. First, to discredit you in case you went public with your suspicions. A drug charge, even a minor one, would undermine your credibility and give them leverage. And the second, warning, to show others what happens when you ask questions. The courtroom theatrics weren't just about humiliating you. They were performance for anyone watching. A demonstration of power. I think about Officer Mendoza's mocking impersonation, the casual laughter it elicited. Not just cruelty, but strategic cruelty. Messaging disguised as amusement. We've been building our case for over a year, Agent Richardson continues. Carefully, methodically, knowing that one wrong move would send the operation underground. Your evidence, particularly the audio recordings and location data, provided connections we were missing. A knock at the door interrupts us. One of the agents who flanked Richardson in the courtroom enters, his expression grave. "We've got a situation," he says. 2 officers from the 2nd Precinct just attempted to access Ms. Williams' apartment. When the building manager questioned them, they claimed to be executing a search warrant, which they couldn't produce. They left when he threatened to call 911. The room's atmosphere shifts instantly. Agent Richardson stands, professionalism hardening into something more urgent. "We need to move you to a secure location," she tells me. Now, the network is scrambling, which makes them unpredictable. The reality I've been holding at intellectual distance suddenly crashes in. This isn't just about testimony and evidence anymore. It's about immediate physical danger. My brother, I say, gathering my belongings with shaking hands. My godfather. If they're looking for me, they might. We've already placed protective details with your family members, she assures me. And we're securing digital evidence from your cloud accounts before they can be compromised. As we move through the building toward a service exit, a deeper understanding settles over me. For weeks, I've been playing defense, gathering evidence to protect myself, creating redundancies in case I was silenced. Now we're shifting to offense, and the full weight of what that means presses against my chest like a physical force. Where are we going? I ask as we approach a black SUV with tinted windows. Federal safe house outside the city, Agent Richardson replies. You'll be there with 2 other witnesses until we complete the initial round of arrests. Other witnesses? She hesitates briefly. One is a 19-year-old trafficking victim who escaped 3 months ago. Her testimony connects Officer Brennan directly to the transportation operation. The other is an evidence technician from the department who's been documenting evidence tampering for the past year. As we slide into the vehicle, the magnitude of what's unfolding expands around me. This isn't just about my isolated incident anymore. It's about a constellation of testimonies, evidence, and witnesses that together form a picture powerful enough to bring down a deeply entrenched criminal operation. The SUV pulls away from the federal building, taking a circuitous route through side streets to avoid main thoroughfares. Agent Richardson receives updates through her earpiece, occasionally responding with clipped acknowledgments. They've initiated containment protocols at the department, she informs me after one such exchange. Secured the evidence room, frozen electronic access for suspected officers, and placed administrative holds on the primary targets. How many arrests are you expecting? Initial sweep will include 12 officers and 7 civilians by morning. The second phase will target higher-level connections, politicians, bureaucrats, businessmen who facilitated or profited from the operation. The casual way she mentions politicians sends a chill through me. How high does this reach? Agent Richardson's expression reveals nothing, but her slight hesitation speaks volumes. We have evidence implicating a circuit court judge, 2 city council members, and a state representative. Possibly higher, but those connections are still being verified. The scope is staggering, a criminal enterprise masquerading as law enforcement, protected by the very systems designed to prevent such corruption. And somehow, my simple act of documentation, of refusing to look away from what I witnessed, helped bring it to light. As we leave the city limits, my phone buzzes with a news alert. The headline freezes the blood in my veins. Multiple officers arrested in human trafficking investigation. Federal authorities execute search warrants at police headquarters. It's happening. Right now, the carefully constructed facade that protected these men for years is being dismantled in real time. Your case was the catalyst, Agent Richardson says, noticing my expression as I read the article. But this investigation has been building for much longer. What you did was provide the thread that connected separate pieces we've been tracking. Will it be enough? I ask, the question emerging from my deepest fear. With connections that high, with that much power involved, will the case actually move forward? Or will it be buried like so many others? She doesn't offer false reassurance. That depends partly on you and the other witnesses. Your continued testimony, your willingness to stand firm when the intimidation escalates, which it will. These people have resources, influence, and absolutely nothing to lose. The safe house appears as we crest a wooded hill, a modest cabin-style structure that would look like a vacation rental to casual observers. 2 more federal vehicles are already parked outside, agents establishing a perimeter with practiced efficiency. As we pull into the driveway, Agent Richardson turns to me, her professional distance giving way to something more personal. What you did in that courtroom today, refusing to be silenced, turning their weapon of humiliation back against them, was extraordinary. But the hardest part is still ahead. She holds my gaze steadily. They're going to try to discredit you, dig into your past, question your motives, paint you as opportunistic, unstable, vindictive. I know, I reply, thinking of every black woman who has ever dared to challenge power and been systematically dismantled for her courage. I've been preparing for that since the moment I filed that first report. Good. She nods once, decision made. Because in 3 days, we're going to ask you to do something even more difficult than what you did today. What's that? Tell your story publicly. Not just in closed testimony, but in a press conference that will be covered nationally. Put your face and name to these accusations, knowing that half the country will call you a hero and half will call you something much worse. The weight of what she's asking settles over me, not just to provide evidence, but to become the public face of an explosive accusation against entrenched power, to step into a spotlight that has burned others beyond recognition. Why me? I ask, though I suspect I already know the answer. Because you're credible, educated, respected in your community, without criminal history for them to exploit. She pauses. And because your background in education gives you a communication skill that most of our other witnesses don't have. You can make people understand what's at stake here beyond the legal details. As we exit the vehicle and approach the safe house, I consider the path that brought me here. How a simple detour on a March evening led to this moment. How my lifelong habit of careful observation, a survival skill honed through years of navigating systems not designed for people who look like me, transformed into a weapon against corruption. Inside, I'm introduced to the other witnesses. Elena, the young woman whose haunted eyes and hunched shoulders speak of traumas I can barely imagine. And Michael, the evidence technician whose nervous energy manifests in constantly tapping fingers and darting glances toward windows and doors. We are an unlikely trio, united only by what we've seen and our refusal to unsee it, by our willingness to risk everything to bring truth to light. As federal agents establish security protocols and communication channels around us, I find myself standing at the cabin's back window, looking out into darkness that seems to press against the glass like a living thing. Are you afraid? Elena asks, appearing silently beside me. Her accent is Eastern European, her English careful but fluent. Yes, I answer honestly, but not of them. She waits, her young face showing wisdom beyond her years. I'm afraid a world where what they did continues unchallenged, I explain. Where power operates without accountability. Where people look away because looking directly at corruption is too painful or too dangerous. Elena nods slowly, understanding. In my country, we have saying, truth is heavy, so few carry it. But you carried it. Even when they try to make you ashamed, you carried it. Her simple observation strikes directly at what happened in that courtroom. How they used shame as a weapon, how they expected my humiliation to silence me, how they fundamentally misunderstood what drives people to speak when speaking carries such cost. My phone buzzes again, another news alert. The arrests have expanded, now including a judge whose name I recognize immediately. Judge Harrison, the very man who presided over my case with such dismissive condescension just hours ago. The pieces click into place with sickening clarity. He wasn't just a biased judge. He was an active participant, using his position to ensure cases that might expose the network were discredited or dismissed, to ensure people like me never got far enough to be heard. Agent Richardson approaches, noting what I'm reading on my screen. That's just the beginning, she says quietly. By this time tomorrow, half the department's command structure will be under investigation. The mayor has already requested federal oversight of police operations. And the trafficking victims? I ask, what happens to them? Some will be key witnesses like Elena. Others will be connected with support services, paths to legal status if they're undocumented. Many will require long-term trauma care. Her expression softens slightly. It's not a perfect system, but it's better than where they were. As night deepens around the safe house, I think about the young women I saw being escorted into that storage facility. How their vulnerability was weaponized against them by the very people sworn to protect them. How systems of power so often prey upon those with the least ability to resist. And I think about what waits for me when I step in front of cameras in 3 days to tell a story that powerful people desperately want to remain untold. The machinery of discreditation that will activate instantly. The threats that will follow. The way my entire life will be dissected for any fragment that could be used to undermine my testimony. Yet alongside that dread runs a current of something stronger. the same certainty that steadied my voice in that courtroom when I refused to be what they expected. The knowledge that truth, properly documented and strategically deployed, is its own kind of power. They humiliated me because they believed shame would silence me. Instead, it became the catalyst for their undoing. In 3 days, I will stand before the world and turn their weapon against them once more. Not with rage or vengeance, but with the methodical precision they never expected from a high school vice principal who noticed what she wasn't supposed to see. And this time, no one will be laughing. Hey, everyone, I'm absolutely blown away by your incredible comments from around the world. Where are you watching from today? If you're as invested as I am in seeing justice unfold in this powerful story, please hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens when Ms. Williams faces the press and the full extent of this trafficking network is revealed. What do you think will happen next? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The makeup artist's hands are gentle but businesslike as she applies powder to my forehead to reduce glare under the lights, she explains. Through the green room window, I glimpse the assembly of cameras and journalists gathering in the federal building's press room. There are more than I expected. National outlets, not just local. 5 minutes, Ms. Williams, a young FBI media liaison, informs me, clipboard clutched to her chest. Agent Richardson asked if you'd like to review your talking points again. I shake my head. I'm ready. The truth is, I haven't slept more than 3 hours at a stretch in the 3 days since the arrests began. Not because of fear, though there's been plenty of that, but because of the scope of what's been unfolding. Each hour brings new revelations, new names added to the investigation, new understanding of how deep the corruption reached. 42 arrests so far, 17 police officers, 3 judges, for city officials, 18 civilians connected to the trafficking operation, evidence seized from 15 locations, including comprehensive financial records detailing transactions, payoffs, and blackmail material dating back nearly a decade. And 5 more young women rescued from a warehouse outside the city limits just yesterday, bringing the total to 23 victims identified so far. Agent Richardson enters, her customary suit replaced by one slightly more formal for the cameras. You've seen the news? Some of it, I acknowledge. They're already starting the discreditation campaign. This morning's local paper ran a story questioning my political motivations, highlighting a donation I made to a police accountability organization 3 years ago. A right-wing website published my dating history, complete with commentary about my questionable judgment in men. A police union representative suggested on morning television that my accusations were retribution for a previous arrest, a completely fabricated claim designed to plant doubt. Standard procedure. Exactly what Agent Richardson warned me to expect. It will get worse after today, she says, not sugarcoating anything. Once they see the evidence packets we're releasing to the media, the gloves will come off completely. I know. I smooth my skirt, the same one I wore to that courtroom 3 days ago. A deliberate choice. I've prepared my brother to handle my social media accounts. Changed privacy settings on everything. Alerted my principal about potential disruption at the school. Agent Richardson nods approval. The U.S. Attorney wants to acknowledge your role directly in his statement. Are you comfortable with that level of identification? The question gives me pause. Until now, I've been referred to in official statements only as a civilian witness whose evidence contributed to the investigation. Being named directly by the U.S. Attorney would cement my position as a central figure in the case, elevating both my visibility and my risk. Yes, I decide. Visibility is protection at this point. Good. One more thing. She handed me a file folder. These came in this morning. Testimonials from 3 of the women rescued last week. They asked specifically for you to have them. I opened the folder with careful fingers, finding handwritten notes in varied penmanship. Most are in Spanish, but one is in careful English. Asterisk, Ms. Williams, they say you saw us when no one else would look. That you spoke when others stayed silent. I don't remember you, but I will never forget what you did. Because of you, I will see my mother again. Asterisk, Elena T. My eyes burn with sudden tears. Not from fear or stress, but from a simple recognition of shared humanity, of connections that transcend the arbitrary barriers of circumstance, language, and status that so often divide us. It's time, the liaison announces from the doorway. I follow Agent Richardson through corridors now familiar after days of testimony and evidence review. The press room falls silent as we enter, a sea of faces turning in unison, cameras pivoting to capture our approach to the podium. The U.S. Attorney, a formidable woman named Helena Graves, whose reputation for prosecuting corruption cases precedes her, nods slightly as I take my place beside her. "Good afternoon," she begins, her voice commanding immediate attention. 3 days ago, federal authorities in cooperation with state police and the Attorney General's office began executing arrest warrants in what has become the largest anti-corruption and human trafficking operation in this state's history. She details the arrests, the charges, the evidence seized, information already reported, but now confirmed officially. I stand straight beside her, aware of the cameras documenting every micro-expression, every blink, every adjustment of my posture. This investigation, which has been active for 14 months, received critical evidence from a civilian witness whose courage and methodical documentation helped connect disparate threads of our ongoing case. She turns slightly toward me. Ms. Amara Williams, vice principal at Westlake High School, documented suspicious activities over several months, created secure evidence chains, and persisted in seeking justice despite significant personal risk and deliberate attempts to silence and discredit her. Camera shutters click rapidly as the assembled journalists register this new information, connecting it to earlier reports about a black woman whose court case had somehow triggered the massive operation. Ms. Williams will provide her account of events, after which she will take limited questions. I remind the press corps that certain details remain sealed as this is an ongoing investigation with pending prosecutions. She steps back, yielding the podium to me. The weight of dozens of gazes presses against me like a physical force. I place my prepared statement on the lectern, but don't immediately refer to it. My name is Amara Williams. I begin, my voice steady despite the thundering of my heart. 3 months ago, a detour on my drive home led me past a storage facility where I witnessed something that seemed wrong. Young women being escorted into a building under circumstances that appeared coercive. I recount the sequence of events clinically, my initial observation, the subsequent pattern recognition, the careful documentation process, the strategic redundancies built into my evidence collection. I describe the retaliatory traffic stop, the planted evidence, the courtroom humiliation designed to silence me. What these officers and their collaborators fail to understand, I continue, is that their system of intimidation relies upon isolation. It requires victims and witnesses to believe they are alone, unsupported, and powerless against institutional forces. I look directly into the cameras now, speaking not just to the journalists, but to anyone who might find themselves in similar circumstances. I am a black woman who has navigated systems of power my entire life. I am an educator who teaches young people to question, document, and verify. I'm the daughter of a mother who cleaned courthouses at night and a father who drove city buses before dawn. Parents who taught me that justice doesn't always arrive unprompted, but must sometimes be invited through persistent witnessing. The room is utterly silent now. Not even the sound of shuffling papers or clicking keyboards interrupting the moment. The trafficking operation we exposed exploited vulnerability in all its forms. It targeted young women without documentation, without language skills, without resources. It flourished because those in power calculated correctly for too long that no one who mattered to them would notice, that no one who noticed would speak, that no one who spoke would be believed. I pause, allowing the weight of those words to settle across the room. They were wrong, and their miscalculation has now exposed not just individual corruption, but systemic failures that allowed human beings to be treated as commodities in the shadow of institutions sworn to protect them. The first question comes from a veteran court reporter whose coverage of police misconduct cases I've followed for years. Ms. Williams, were you surprised by how high up the corruption reached? I was surprised only by the scope, not by the nature of the connections. I answer truthfully. Power protects power. Once I understood that police officers were directly involved, it became logical that their protection required cooperation from those who oversee them: judges, prosecutors, administrators. "Are you concerned for your safety?" asks a journalist from a national cable network. "Yes. I reply without hesitation. But my concern for what happens if we remain silent outweighs my fear of speaking. The questions continue about evidence, about my teaching career, about whether I'll pursue civil action against the department. I answer each directly, neither dramatizing nor minimizing the reality of what has occurred. Then comes the question I've been anticipating since I agreed to this press conference. Ms. Williams, begins a reporter from a conservative outlet known for pro-police coverage, some have suggested your actions were politically motivated, part of a broader anti-police agenda. How do you respond to accusations that you've exploited this situation for attention? The room stills, journalists leaning forward subtly, sensing potential drama in my response. Agent Richardson shifts almost imperceptibly beside me, ready to intervene if necessary. I look directly at the reporter, taking in his expectant expression, the slight smugness in his posture, suggesting he believes he's asked the question that will crack my composure. I teach teenagers, I reply evenly. Every day, I watch young people navigate systems of power that weren't designed with their interests in mind. I teach them that documenting truth matters, that speaking up matters, that seeing injustice and remaining silent makes you complicit in its continuation. I straighten slightly, my voice gaining strength. This was never about politics or attention. It was about 23 young women who were treated as property. It was about officers who betrayed their oath to protect and serve. It was about a system that functions properly only when those within it choose integrity over self-protection. I pause, allowing my gaze to sweep across the assembled press. If believing that human trafficking is wrong regardless of who perpetrates it constitutes a political agenda, then perhaps the problem lies not with my motivation, but with those who would politicize basic human dignity. The reporter has no follow-up. As the press conference concludes, U.S. Attorney Graves steps forward again, announcing that comprehensive evidence packets are being distributed containing documentation of the trafficking network, financial records, and testimony from victims and witnesses who have consented to share their accounts. This case represents not just a criminal prosecution, she emphasizes, but a necessary examination of institutional failures that allowed such corruption to flourish. Reform must follow accountability. In the days and weeks that follow, that accountability comes in waves. The investigation expands to neighboring jurisdictions, revealing similar operations in 3 other cities. The governor announces a commission to examine police oversight statewide. Federal authorities launch civil rights investigations into department practices. But accountability and justice are not synonymous, as I learn repeatedly throughout the process. Some officers receive plea deals in exchange for testimony against higher-ranking officials. Some judges retire rather than face prosecution, protecting their pensions. Some victims are deemed not credible enough to testify, their cases deprioritized. The machinery of legal compromise grinds forward, transforming righteous outrage into pragmatic outcomes that feel perpetually insufficient. The personal cost accumulates as well. Death threats arrive regularly despite my changed address and enhanced security. My car is vandalized twice. A small but vocal contingent of officers' wives and family members organized protests outside my school, necessitating my temporary leave of absence. Online harassment becomes so constant that I abandon social media entirely. 3 months after the press conference, as the first cases move toward trial, I sit across from Elena in a small cafe near the transitional housing where she now lives. Her English has improved remarkably, and she's enrolled in GED preparation classes, her quiet determination evident in the textbooks she carries everywhere. They offered me witness protection, she tells me, stirring her tea slowly. New name, new city. Start over where no one knows. Will you take it? I ask. She considers this, her young face solemn with the weight of decision. I think no. To disappear is to let them win still. To say what happened is too shameful to carry forward. Her eyes meet mine with unexpected clarity. You didn't hide. Why should I? Her question strikes at the heart of what I've been wrestling with since that first court appearance. The balance between self-preservation and bearing witness. The profound cost of visibility versus the deeper cost of silence. The choice belongs to you, I tell her gently. There's courage in staying visible, but there's no shame in choosing safety. She nods, understanding the nuance. Either way, I go forward. That is what matters. Not backward to that place. Not backward. The words stay with me as I drive home, as I review case documents with federal prosecutors, as I gradually resume my duties at school, where students now regard me with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. 6 months after the press conference, I sit in another courtroom. This one federal, without the local power dynamics that corrupted my original case. Officer Brennan and 3 co-defendants faced the judge for sentencing, having been convicted on multiple counts of trafficking, racketeering, and civil rights violations. I am not the only witness present. The gallery holds other women who testified, department employees who documented misconduct, victims brave enough to face their abusers, community members who provided corroborating evidence. Together, we form a constellation of truth-tellers whose collective witness proved stronger than the machinery of silence that once seemed impenetrable. When the judge announces the sentences, 30 years for Brennan, substantial terms for the others, I feel no triumph, no vindication, no sense that justice has been fully served. How could any sentence compensate for lives derailed, for dignity violated, for trust betrayed? What I feel instead is the weight of witness lifting slightly. The burden of carrying truth others refused to see shifting from my shoulders to the official record, where it can no longer be denied or dismissed. As we exit the courthouse, reporters gather on the steps, cameras tracking our emergence into the autumn sunlight. They call my name, seeking comment on the sentences, on the ongoing investigations, on how it feels to be vindicated after everything that happened. I pause briefly, considering what to say, how to encapsulate the complex reality of this moment. The young prosecutor who has worked closely with me on the case touches my arm gently. "You don't have to speak," she reminds me. "You've done enough." But I think of Elena's words in that cafe. I think of my students watching how I navigate this moment. I think of other witnesses in other cities who might be standing at their own crossroads of silence and speech. Justice is incomplete, I tell the assembled cameras, my voice calm and clear in the autumn air. These convictions don't erase the harm done to dozens of women. They don't automatically reform systems that allowed such corruption to flourish. They don't eliminate the barriers that made these victims specifically vulnerable to exploitation. I look directly into the nearest camera, speaking now to anyone who might find themselves where I stood 6 months ago, witnessing something wrong and wondering whether speaking carries too great a cost. But they remind us that even the most entrenched power can be held accountable when enough of us refuse to look away. When we document carefully, speak precisely, and insist upon being heard. A reporter calls out, "Do you regret coming forward, given the personal costs you've endured?" The question deserves honest consideration. I've lost friends who couldn't handle the stress of association with such a high-profile case. Changed my home address twice. Received enough threats that I now automatically check under my car before driving. Spent countless hours in depositions and interviews that drained my energy and disrupted my career. I regret that speaking the truth carries such cost. I answer finally, but I would regret silence more. As I descend the courthouse steps, Elena emerges from the building behind me, flanked by her attorney and a victim advocate. Our eyes meet briefly across the space between us. 2 women connected by circumstance, by a system that underestimated us both, by the simple act of refusing to remain invisible. She has decided against witness protection, choosing instead to testify publicly, to pursue education, to reclaim her name and story rather than surrender them. Her choice is not better or worse than those who chose differently, just a path that allows her to move forward rather than backward. In that moment of silent understanding between us, I find the resolution I've been seeking throughout this journey. Not in the sentences handed down today, not in the reforms still being negotiated, not even in the public vindication of my account, but in the simple recognition that justice isn't a single moment of triumph or a perfect outcome. It's a continuous process of witnessing, speaking, and refusing to surrender truth to comfort or convenience. It's understanding that each act of courage makes the next one slightly more possible for someone else. They humiliated me in that courtroom because they believed shame would silence me. Instead, it became the catalyst for their undoing. And now, as Elena and I walk together down those courthouse steps, past the cameras and microphones and public curiosity, we carry forward something they could never take from us. The quiet certainty that comes from standing in your truth, regardless of who tries to deny it. Not backward, but forward. Not silenced, but heard. That is victory enough. Hey everyone, I'm absolutely moved by your incredible comments from around the world. Where are you watching from today? If this powerful story of courage and justice resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button. I share stories that remind us what one person's brave stand can accomplish in the face of corruption. What moment in Amara's journey impacted you most? Let me know in the comments below.